Okay, kids, first I want to start out with an apology. There's something you may not know about these schools that you are attending, something your teachers might not even know, and something your parents certainly don't know. Now, yesterday you heard our president, Barack Obama, tell you that here in America you write your own destiny. Nobody writes that destiny for you. The president told you to make your own future. President Obama called on each of you to set your own goals for your education and then to do everything you could to meet those goals. Well, that was a great message. I hope you took it to heart. But you need to know that President Obama's message was quite a bit different than the message delivered by another president, Woodrow Wilson, just prior to World War I. It was during the years prior to World War I that our present system of government education was being born. Now, let me pause for a second and try to explain my use of words. You always hear the schools you attend referred to as public schools. That's what it says on the side of the bus. I prefer to use the phrase government schools. Let me explain why. The building you're sitting in was built by and is owned by the government. It sits on land owned by the government. All of the people who work in this building, from the teachers to the custodians, from the coaches to the front office staff, all of these people work for the government. They're government employees. Their paychecks are written by government. The people who decide what you will study every day, they're government employees. The people who decide what textbooks you will use, they're government employees. And it is the government that compels your attendance. These schools, then, are owned, operated, and staffed by government. So, they're government schools. Now, there are a lot of people who don't like for our schools to be referred to this way, and there's a good reason for this. You may not understand it right now, but when you become an adult, one of the painful lessons you will learn is that there are very few things that government does well. People who object to the phrase government schools do so because they know that government is synonymous with failure. But let's get back to President Woodrow Wilson and the creation of our system of government schools prior to World War I. Those years marked a period of massive industrial expansion in the United States. Great industrialists like Henry Ford, J.P. Morgan, and others were concerned about whether or not there would be enough workers to man the great new industrial complexes that were being created. Now, listen to this, because this is very important. Factories were being built across America. These factories needed workers. They didn't need scholars. They needed workers. They didn't need young people with boatloads of ambition to see what they could make of themselves. They needed workers. They needed young men and women who would readily accept a subordinate role working on an assembly line somewhere. These people weren't one bit shy about their goals either. Back then, before World War I, the schools were essentially being formed and run by a group that the media called the Education Trust. The National Education Association, which is that union your teacher probably belongs to, was right there back then, right there at the table when the Education Trust first met. Now look, I'm not trying to turn this into a history lesson. History class comes up later. But I have something very important to tell you here, something you need to know. And that is, you've been had. All along, you've thought that this school, the government tells you that you have to attend, is designed to help you achieve every success you want out of life. You couldn't be more wrong. This is not the way our government schools were designed. Let's get back to that Education Trust and the formation of our schools. After the first meeting of this group, remember, the NEA was there, a British sociologist by the name of Benjamin Kidd wrote that the very idea behind the formation of these government schools was to impose on the young the ideal of subordination. How's that sound to you? These schools were designed to teach you to be a subordinate. And why was that? The great government school teacher has the answer in his book, The Underground History of American Education. That government school teacher, John Taylor Gatto, the New York Teacher of the Year. He explains it this way. Gatto explains that in pre-World War I, the industrialists, Ford, Morgan, Rockefeller, were convinced that the American tradition of independent livelihoods would rob industry of the manpower it needed to keep the industrial wheels turning. In our government schools, then, the students, and that's you, you were to learn to think of yourself as an employee, a worker competing for the attention and favor of management. Above all, you were not to come to consider yourself to be a self-determined free agent. And that brings us back to Woodrow Wilson and the speech he gave to some American businessmen. And this quote says a lot about the schools you are attending today. President Wilson said, "We want one class to have a liberal education." That means a broad education. We want another class, a very much larger class of necessity, to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult, manual tasks. There, can you make it any clearer? John Taylor Gatto sums it up, and I would really hope that you or maybe your parents would read his book. But Gatto summarizes the goal of the American educational establishment this way: the ability of Americans to think as independent producers had to be curtailed. And they're talking about you, not some mysterious other person. They're talking about you. It was your ability to think as an independent person that had to be curtailed. It was you that had to be molded into a good subordinate. So how do you feel about that? You see what you're up against here? All this time, you've been working and studying inside an institution that was designed to rob you of your individuality and to turn you into a good government subject and a subordinate employee. Now, I'm sure that even your teachers don't understand this part of the history of American government education. My message to you is this: these schools can give you the basic tools you need to survive as a good worker and a government subject. If you have aspirations beyond that, it's going to be up to you. There's no doubt you can do it, but you're going to have to dedicate yourself to that cause right now. Now I know what you're up against. Let me see if I can offer some help and some advice. Now let me share something with you. It may be hard for you to accept this right now, but 20 years from now, whatever you are, whatever you do to make a living, whatever your lifestyle, whatever your condition in life, 20, 30, 50 years from now, barring some physical or mental disaster, wherever you are is going to be directly attributable to the decisions you make between now and then. And every decision counts, every one. Whether or not to study, whether or not to go to college, what college to go to, who you hang out with, whether or not to have sex, seat belts, helmets on a motorcycle. You make the decision, and it'll guide your life. I don't know who first said this. Search of the internet doesn't help me, so I'm going to lay claim to the quote: use wisely your power of choice. And the 3 easy rules to make sure you'll never, ever be poor. Stay in school. Don't get pregnant or get somebody else pregnant. And when you get out of school, get a job. Any job, and keep that job until a better one comes along. Now, that's all I have time for. Maybe the speech wasn't quite as inspirational as the president's speech yesterday, but at least you now have an idea of what you're up against in your government school. Are you willing to spend all this time in school just to become a subordinate? Yeah, I didn't think so. So show them that you can't be molded into just another mass-produced government employee. Proclaim your rarity, go the extra mile, make your choices wisely, and you're going to leave a lot of people in the dust. And thank you very much.
Informative, entertaining, in your face. You're listening to Neal Boortz.
Wow, I didn't say half of what I wanted to say. I wrote down a lot more than I got a chance to say. Drat!
Boortz!